At her family dinner, my wife laughed and said, "He's never really amounted to much." Her parents smiled awkwardly. Her brother laughed out loud. Then her father turned to me and asked, "So, are you still the one paying the mortgage?" The room went quiet. My wife stopped laughing. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The silverware clinked against porcelain plates, creating a rhythm that filled the spaces between conversation. Nolan Price sat at the long dining table, his hands resting on his lap beneath the table's edge, watching condensation roll down his water glass. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, mixed with the faint sweetness of Kelsey's mother's lavender perfume. Cedar Hollow, Missouri wasn't the kind of place where people kept secrets for long. The town had 3,400 residents, one stoplight, and a lake that reflected the sky like a mirror on calm days. Everyone knew everyone. Gossip traveled faster than the wind that rippled across the water. By Monday morning, whatever happened at Sunday dinner would be common knowledge at the hardware store, the coffee shop, and the church parking lot. Nolan wore what he always wore, worn Levi's that had faded to a comfortable gray blue, a flannel shirt he'd owned for 5 years, boots that still had mud on them from his morning walk. Nothing flashy, nothing that invited questions. He'd learned a long time ago that dressing down kept expectations manageable. Kelsey sat beside him in a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than his entire outfit. Her dark hair was pulled back, showing off earrings that caught the light when she moved her head. She leaned back in her chair, swirling a glass of white wine, her posture relaxed and confident. She was holding court the way she always did at family gatherings. "The thing about Nolan," Kelsey said, her voice carrying that smooth, almost musical quality she used when she wanted people to lean in and listen, "is that he's absolutely dependable. I mean, you can set your watch by him." Her mother, Patricia, nodded with visible relief. She'd been waiting for Kelsey to say something positive. But ambition? Kelsey continued, shaking her head with a small, indulgent smile. "That's just not his thing. He's comfortable where he is, you know? And honestly, I've made peace with that." The words landed softly, dressed up as acceptance. But Nolan heard what lived underneath them. He'd been hearing it for months now. The subtle edge, the barely concealed disappointment, the implication that she'd settled for less than she deserved. Her brother Lance laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. "Well, somebody's got to be the steady one, right?" Patricia set her fork down gently. "There's nothing wrong with being practical." "Oh, absolutely," Kelsey agreed, reaching over to pat Nolan's hand. The gesture was performative, meant for the audience around the table. "He's wonderful at what he does. Very reliable." Nolan said nothing. He cut another piece of chicken, chewed slowly. The meat was dry. He washed it down with water. Raymond, Kelsey's father, had been quiet most of the meal. He sat at the head of the table like a judge presiding over court, his gray hair combed back, his reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He owned the town's only insurance agency and carried himself like someone used to being the smartest person in the room. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "So, Nolan," Raymond said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, "you still covering the mortgage on that house?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the sound from the kitchen seemed to fade. Kelsey's wine glass stopped mid-swirl. Her smile froze, then cracked at the edges. Nolan looked directly at Raymond. His voice came out level, calm, without inflection. "Yes." One word. Nothing more. He didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't fill the silence with nervous elaboration. Raymond's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if he'd expected more. Patricia glanced between her husband and her son-in-law, clearly uncomfortable. Lance looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. It became its own presence at the table, demanding attention, forcing people to reckon with what had just been asked and what hadn't been answered. Kelsey's face flushed. She set her wine glass down with more force than necessary. the base hitting the table with a sharp tap. "Well," she said brightly, her voice too high, too tight. "Anyone want more bread?" The drive home took 20 minutes through roads that curve along the lake. Streetlights were sparse. The darkness pressed against the windows of Nolan's truck, broken only by the headlights cutting through it. Kelsey sat with her arms crossed, her body angled toward the passenger window. The silence between them was different from the one at dinner. This one vibrated with anger, barely held in check. 3 miles passed. "You embarrass me," she finally said. Nolan kept his eyes on the road. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. "You embarrass me first," he replied. Her head snapped toward him. "What?" "At dinner. When you told your family, I have no ambition." Kelsey scoffed, a sharp exhale through her nose. "I didn't say that. I said you're comfortable. There's a difference." "Not really. You're being ridiculous." She turned back to the window. "You take everything personally." There it was. Her favorite line. The one she used like a shield whenever he tried to point out something that hurt. It transformed her actions into his problem, her cruelty into his oversensitivity. It let her off the hook while putting him in the wrong. Nolan had heard it for years now. At first, he believed it. He'd questioned himself, wondered if maybe he was too sensitive, too quick to feel insulted. But somewhere along the way, he'd started paying attention to the pattern. The words only came out when she'd done something she didn't want to be accountable for. "Your father asked if I'm still paying the mortgage," Nolan said quietly. "In front of your whole family. Like it's some kind of joke." "He was just curious. He was testing me. And you made it weird by not engaging." Kelsey's voice rose. "You could have laughed it off. Made a joke. Instead, you just sat there looking wounded. I answered his question. You gave him one word. It was a yes or no question." Kelsey made a frustrated sound in her throat. She dug through her purse, pulled out her phone, the screen's glow illuminating her face in the dark cab. Her thumbs moved rapidly across the keyboard. "Who are you texting?" Nolan asked. "Does it matter?" "I'm just asking." "God, Nolan, you're exhausting." She didn't look up from the phone. "I can't even text someone without you interrogating me." He wasn't interrogating her. He'd asked one question, but pointing that out would only prove her point in her mind, that he was oversensitive, dramatic, making problems out of nothing. So he drove, watched the center line pass beneath the truck, listened to the hum of tires on asphalt. When they pulled into their driveway, Kelsey got out before he'd even shut off the engine. The truck door slammed. Her shoes scraped across the gravel as she walked to the house, fishing for keys in her purse. Nolan sat in the driver's seat for a moment longer, staring at the garage door. The house was beautiful. 2 stories, white siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch with hanging plants. It sat on 3 acres with a view of the lake through the trees. Kelsey had fallen in love with it the moment the realtor showed them the property. "This is it," she'd said, walking through the empty rooms, her voice echoing off the bare walls. "This is exactly what I've always wanted." What she hadn't asked was how they could afford it. She hadn't looked at the paperwork, hadn't questioned the legal structure, hadn't bothered to understand how the purchase was arranged. She just assumed it was hers because she lived there. Nolan finally got out of the truck. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of pine and lake water. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Crickets sang in the grass. He went inside. Kelsey was already upstairs. He could hear her moving around in the bedroom, drawers opening and closing with sharp, angry sounds. He went to the kitchen, poured himself water from the tap, drank it standing at the sink. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window above the faucet. Brown hair that needed a cut, lines around his eyes from squinting at spreadsheets, a face that looked tired. He'd built this life carefully, quietly, without fanfare or flash. And somewhere along the way, Kelsey had decided that minute wasn't worth much. Kelsey Price hadn't always been cruel. When Nolan met her 7 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, she'd been magnetic, sharp-witted, driven, unafraid to challenge him. She worked in marketing for a regional hospital network and talked about her campaigns with the kind of enthusiasm that made boring topics interesting. She listened when he spoke, asked good questions, laughed at his dry humor in a way that felt genuine. Their first date lasted 6 hours. Dinner turned into drinks, Drinks turned into walking around downtown Springfield. Walking turned into sitting on a bench by the fountain, talking until the streetlights came on and the shops closed. You don't talk much about yourself, she'd observed. Not much to tell, he'd replied. I don't believe that. She'd looked at him with real curiosity. Everyone's got a story. He'd liked that she pushed, that she didn't let him hide behind vague answers. By their fourth date, she'd asked what he did for work. Operations consulting, he'd said. Small businesses mostly. I help them streamline processes, cut costs, improve efficiency. That sounds incredibly boring, she'd said with a grin. It is, but you're good at it. Yeah, I am. She'd reached across the table, taken his hand. I like that you're not trying to sell me on how impressive you are. Everyone in my field is always performing. It's exhausting. That's what had drawn her to him initially, the contrast. He was quiet where her world was loud, steady where everything around her moved fast. But what attracted her at the beginning started to bother her once they got married. It began subtly. Small comments about his clothes. Strategized narrative expansion with emotional depth and cinematic pacing. I'm making good progress. I need to continue expanding the story, showing how Kelsey changed over time, and then move into the pattern of their relationship deteriorating. I need to make sure I'm adding enough detail and depth while keeping the flow natural and cinematic. Let me continue with showing how Kelsey changed after marriage and success came into their lives. I need to maintain the pacing and add sensory details, realistic dialogue, and internal thought from Nolan's perspective. You should dress up more, she'd said one evening before they went out with her work friends. First impressions matter. I thought you liked that I didn't care about that stuff, he'd replied. I do. These people are important for my career. I want them to take you seriously. He'd change his shirt, worn the one button up he owned that she'd bought him for Christmas. Then came the suggestions about the truck. It's so old, Nolan. Don't you want something nicer? It runs fine, but what does it say about us? That we don't waste money on things that don't matter. She'd sighed, disappointed, like he'd missed the point entirely. The real shift happened after Nolan landed a contract with a manufacturing company that needed a complete operational overhaul. The project took 8 months and paid more than he usually made in a year. He didn't broadcast it, just deposited the checks, paid down debts, invested the rest. But Kelsey saw the bank statements. Why didn't you tell me? She'd asked, sitting at the kitchen table with the papers spread in front of her. Tell you what, that we had this much money. I didn't think it mattered. Money's money. She'd looked at him like he'd spoken a different language. Of course it matters. We could upgrade, move somewhere better. You could expand your business. I don't want to expand. I like working alone. But think of what you could build. Her eyes had lit up with possibilities. You could hire people, create something bigger. I don't want bigger. I want sustainable. That's when he'd seen it. The flash of frustration, the tightening around her eyes. She'd wanted him to want more. Needed him to be ambitious in a way that matched her vision of success. When he refused, something in her hardened. She started talking about him differently. To friends, to family. The words were always coded in affection, but the subtext was clear. He wasn't reaching his potential. He was holding her back. She deserved better. And Nolan, who'd never cared much about what other people thought, found himself caring when it was his wife tearing him down in public while smiling. But what bothered him most wasn't the criticism. It was that she spent his money while resenting that he made it. 3 weeks after the dinner at her parents' house, Nolan sat in his home office going through invoices. The room was small, barely more than a converted spare bedroom, with a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a window that looked out over the backyard. The door opened without a knock. Kelsey leaned against the frame, holding her phone. I'm going to Chicago next weekend, she announced. There's a conference. Nolan glanced up from his laptop. I thought that was in March. They moved it. She scrolled through her phone without looking at him. I already booked the hotel. Which hotel? The Riverside. Why? That's expensive. Her eyes finally met his. It's where the conference is being held. Everyone stays there. It's about networking, Nolan. How much is the room? Does it matter? This is for my career. I'm just asking. $300 a night. She said it defiantly, daring him to object. For 3 nights. $900. Plus flights. Plus meals. plus whatever else she'd charged to the credit card while she was there. Okay, Nolan said simply. She blinked, surprised. That's it? No lecture about budgeting. I didn't say anything about budgeting. But you're thinking it. Kelsey, you said you need to go. So go. She pushed off the doorframe, irritated that he hadn't given her a fight to win. You always do this. Act like everything's fine when I know you're judging me. I'm not judging you. Then what's with the third degree about the hotel? I asked one question. It's not what you ask. It's how you ask it. She crossed her arms. With that tone, like I'm some irresponsible child you have to manage. Nolan closed his laptop. I have never treated you like a child. You monitor every dollar I spend. No, I don't. You have full access to the accounts. You can spend whatever you want. But then you make me feel guilty about it. How? By asking questions. By making me explain myself. The conversation was spiraling the way it always did. Her feeling attacked by basic questions, him defending simple communication, both of them ending up in different arguments than they'd started. Nolan stood up, moved past her out of the office. He went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator without knowing what he was looking for. Kelsey followed him. This is what I'm talking about, she said. You shut down. You walk away instead of actually talking to me. What do you want me to say? I want you to be honest. If you have a problem with me going to Chicago, just say it. I don't have a problem with you going to Chicago. Then what's the issue? There is no issue. Nolan. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to something that almost sounded concerned. I know things have been tense, but we need to communicate better. Both of us. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the expression on her face that mimicked sincerity while her eyes calculated whether this approach would work better than anger. You're right, he said quietly. We should communicate better. She softened, thinking she'd won. Good, because I love you, and I know you love me. We just need to get back on the same page. Yeah. She smiled, kissed his cheek, then went back upstairs. Nolan stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator he'd opened for no reason. He was tired, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. That night, he couldn't settle. Kelsey had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. He'd stayed up, sitting on the back porch with a glass of water, watching the moon reflect off the lake in the distance. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Yeah, all good. Just busy. You sure? Yeah. The phone buzzed again immediately. You know I can tell when you're lying, even over text. Nolan smiled despite himself. His mother had always been able to read him, just working through some things. Nothing major. Want to come visit this weekend? I'll make that chili you like. Can't. Kelsey's going out of town. I've got work to catch up on. Excuses. But I'll let it slide. Call me if you need to talk. I mean it. I will. He wouldn't. But she already knew that too. Nolan had been 12 when his father left. No warning, no explanation that made sense. One day he was there, the next he was gone, leaving behind a note on the kitchen table and an empty bank account. His mother had cried for exactly one evening. Then she dried her eyes, made a list, and got to work. She'd taken a job at the cannery, worked double shifts, paid bills in cash, so she could see exactly where every dollar went. She taught Nolan that security wasn't something you hoped for. It was something you built carefully, quietly, with your own hands. Don't trust people who make big promises, she told him more than once. Trust the ones who show up and do the work without needing applause. He'd carried that lesson into everything. His business, his relationships, his life. But somewhere along the way, he'd married someone who wanted applause more than she wanted partnership. The back door opened. Kelsey stood silhouetted in the doorway, wrapped in a robe. What are you doing out here? She asked. Couldn't sleep. It's freezing. I'm fine. She hesitated, then stepped back inside. Don't stay out too long. I won't. The door closed. Her footsteps retreated upstairs. Nolan sat alone in the cold, watching his breath form clouds in the dark. The pattern became impossible to ignore. At dinner with friends, Kelsey mentioned how she'd had to handle the landscaping company because Nolan just didn't have time to deal with it. She said it with a long-suffering smile, like she was a saint for picking up his slack. Nolan had never been asked about the landscaping. She'd hired them without telling him. At her office holiday party, She introduced him to her colleagues as the man who keeps the lights on at home, while she laughed. Everyone joined in. It sounded like a compliment unless you knew her well enough to hear the edge underneath. When her best friend complained about her own husband's lack of ambition, Kelsey had nodded sympathetically and said, "Trust me, I understand. Some men are just comfortable being small." Nolan had been standing 10 feet away, close enough to hear every word. He stopped going to her work events after that. "You're making me look bad," she'd argued. "You make me look bad at those events," he countered. "I've never said anything negative about you." "Yes, you have. Repeatedly. You're being paranoid." But he wasn't. He'd started paying attention to the things she said about him when she thought he wasn't listening or didn't care. The comments accumulated like rain in a barrel. Small amounts at first, easy to ignore, but eventually they reached a level where you couldn't pretend they weren't there. She talked about his money as if they'd earned it together, as if her support and encouragement had been equal to his actual work. When he suggested creating a budget, not to limit her, just to plan better, she'd accused him of being controlling. "You want me to ask permission before I buy anything?" she'd said incredulously. "No, I want us to talk about major purchases before they happen." "Like what?" "Like the new furniture you ordered last month. That was barely $3,000. You didn't mention it, because I knew you'd make it into a thing." She'd thrown up her hands. "This is exactly what I mean. You act supportive, but really, you just want to control everything I do." Every conversation ended the same way, her feeling victimized, him going silent. It was easier than fighting, easier than trying to explain that asking questions wasn't controlling, that wanting to communicate about money wasn't an attack, that her constant dismissal of him hurt in ways he didn't know how to articulate. So he stopped trying, and she took his silence as permission to continue. Nolan grew up in Plainview, Arkansas, a town even smaller than Cedar Hollow. Population 847. One elementary school, one church, one gas station that sold beer and fishing bait. His mother, Diane, had raised him in a 2-bedroom house at the end of a gravel road. The roof leaked when it rained hard. The furnace broke every other winter. The bathroom sink dripped constantly no matter how many times they tried to fix it. But it was theirs, paid for in cash over 15 years. Security isn't loud, she used to tell him while they sat at the kitchen table, her sorting through bills, him doing homework. It's built quietly, one piece at a time. Nobody's going to see it and think it's impressive. But you'll sleep better at night, knowing you built something solid. She'd taught him to track expenses in a notebook, to save 10% of everything he earned, to never borrow money unless it was for something that would make him more money. When he was 16, he'd asked why she worked so hard for so little. "Because that's what parents do," she'd said simply. "You take care of your own. You don't complain about it. You just do it." His father had been the opposite. Big plans, big talk, big dreams that never materialized. He'd bounce between jobs, always chasing the next opportunity that was going to change everything. He'd borrowed money from friends, started businesses that failed within months, made promises he never kept. When he left, Diane hadn't seemed surprised. "Your father loved the idea of success more than the work it took to get there," she'd explained to Nolan years later. Some people are like that. They want the reward without the sacrifice. Nolan had promised himself he'd never be like his father. He'd gone to state college, gotten a degree in business management, worked 3 jobs to pay for it, so he graduated without debt. He'd taken an entry-level position at a mid-sized manufacturing firm, learned everything he could about operations, saved aggressively, invested carefully. By 28, he'd started his own consulting business. Nothing fancy, just him, a laptop, and a willingness to solve problems other people found boring. Process optimization, cost analysis, efficiency audits. Most people couldn't stand the tedious nature of the work. Nolan thrived in it. He liked the puzzle of finding waste, the satisfaction of making systems run smoother, the quiet pride of saving his clients money they didn't know they were losing. He built a reputation for being thorough, reliable, and invisible. He came in, fixed what was broken, and left without drama. The work paid well. Not flashy, get-rich-quick money, but steady, dependable income that grew year after year. By the time he married Kelsey, he had more saved than most people twice his age. He owned his truck outright, had no credit card debt, no student loans, no car payments. When they decided to buy the house in Cedar Hollow, Nolan had structured the purchase through his business. It was legal, smart, and protected him if anything went wrong. The mortgage was in his name, the property tied to his LLC. Everything documented, organized, clear. Kelsey had signed the papers without reading them. "You handle all this financial stuff better than me anyway," she'd said, scrawling her signature on page after page. "I trust you." At the time, he believed her. Now, looking back, he realized she'd trusted that he'd take care of everything so she didn't have to think about it. There was a difference. The moment that ended the marriage didn't involve yelling. It didn't involve tears or broken dishes or dramatic confessions. It happened on a Thursday night in November. Nolan had been in his office, finishing up an estimate for a potential client, when he'd heard Kelsey on the phone downstairs. Her voice drifted up through the vents, clear enough to make out the words. "No, it'll be fine," she was saying. "He won't fight it." Nolan stopped typing. "Because he hates conflict," she continued, her tone casual, almost amused. "He'll probably just agree to whatever I ask for. That's how he is." Silence while the other person spoke. "I know, right? I've already talked to someone about it. They said I have a strong case for the house. Like, I've lived here for 5 years. That has to count for something." More silence. Kelsey laughed. "Oh, he'll be upset, but he'll get over it. He always does." Nolan sat perfectly still, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. She was talking about divorce. Not thinking about it. Not considering it as a possibility. She was planning it, strategizing it, gaming out how to take him apart and walk away with as much as possible. And she believed he'd just let her. The conversation continued downstairs, but Nolan stopped listening. Something inside him had shifted. Not broken, just realigned. He'd spent years trying to understand what he was doing wrong, trying to figure out how to communicate better, how to make her happy, how to fix whatever was broken between them. But the problem wasn't him. It was that she saw him as weak. She believed his quiet nature meant he could be pushed around, that his aversion to conflict meant he'd roll over, that his love for her gave her permission to take whatever she wanted. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about that. Nolan opened a new document on his computer and started making notes. The next morning, Nolan called Tom Brennan. Tom had handled his business contract for years, a straightforward lawyer who worked out of a small office above a coffee shop in Springfield. He didn't advertise, didn't have a flashy website, and charged reasonable rates. His entire practice ran on referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated his honesty and attention to detail. "Nolan," Tom answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice instantly recognizable. "What's going on?" "I need to review my personal documents," Nolan said, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. Kelsey was still asleep upstairs. "Everything related to the house, the business structure, assets." A pause. "Okay," Tom said carefully. "Any particular reason?" "Just want to make sure everything's in order." "Everything is in order. I made sure of that when we set it up. But if you want to go through it again, I'm happy to. When can we meet?" "I've got time this afternoon." 3 o'clock work? I'll be there." Tom's office smelled like old paper and strong coffee. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A desk buried under folders and legal pads took up most of the space. Tom himself looked exactly like his office, rumpled, lived in, functional. He gestured to a chair. "Have a seat." Nolan sat. Tom dropped into his own chair, which creaked under his weight. "So," Tom said, folding his hands on the desk. "Want to tell me what's really going on? I need to know where I stand if my marriage ends." Tom didn't react with surprise. He nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd suspected. "All right, let's walk through it." He pulled out a thick folder, spread documents across the desk. Property deeds, LLC formation paperwork, loan agreements, prenuptial agreement. "The house," Tom said, tapping a page, "is owned by your business entity. Kelsey lives there, but legally, it's a company asset. You're the sole member of the LLC. She has no ownership stake. She signed papers when we bought it. She signed acknowledgement forms, not ownership documents." Tom pulled out another page. "See this?" She acknowledged that the property was being purchased as a business asset, that she understood she wasn't being added to the title, and that she had no financial interest in the property itself. She didn't read any of that. Probably not. Most people don't. But she signed it. Her signature. Her initials. Witnessed and notarized. Tom continued going through the documents. The bank accounts, mostly separate, with one joint account for household expenses that Kelsey could access. The investments, all in Nolan's name, predating the marriage. The truck, the equipment for his business, everything. What about spousal support? Nolan asked. Missouri's not a community property state. And you've got a prenup. Tom found the document, flipped to a marked page. Both of you waived alimony. She wanted it that way. Actually, said she'd never ask you for money. Nolan remembered that conversation. It had been right before the wedding, when they'd been sitting in Tom's office going over the prenup. Kelsey had laughed at the suggestion of alimony. I make my own money, she'd said. I'm not one of those women who needs a man to support her. She'd signed with a flourish, proud of her independence. So if she files, Nolan said slowly, what would she get? In a divorce? Whatever's in the joint account. Her personal belongings. Her car, which is in her name. That's about it. Not the house. Not the house. Not your business. Not your savings. Tom leaned back. Nolan, I'm going to be straight with you. If your marriage ends, you're in one of the strongest positions I've ever seen. You kept everything separate. You documented everything. You protected yourself without being obvious about it. I wasn't trying to protect myself. I know. You were being smart about asset management. But the result's the same. Tom studied him. Has she threatened divorce? Not directly. But you think it's coming. Yeah. Do you want it to come? Nolan was quiet for a moment. Outside Tom's office window, he could see people walking past on the sidewalk. Normal people. People who probably had normal marriages, normal problems, normal ways of working things out. I want peace, he finally said. And I can't have that while I'm married to someone who doesn't respect me. Tom nodded. Fair enough. Well, when it happens, if it happens, you call me immediately. Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. Don't make any promises. Just call me. I will. They shook hands. Nolan left the office feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, exactly, but clarity. The cold, hard clarity of knowing exactly where he stood and what he needed to do. Kelsey came home that night with shopping bags. I found the perfect dress for the conference, she announced, dropping the bags on the kitchen counter. And these shoes that'll go with everything. Nolan was making dinner, pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy. He glanced at the bags, but didn't ask how much she'd spent. That's great, he said. She waited for more. When it didn't come, she pulled out the dress, held it up. Don't you want to see? Sure. That's it? Just sure. Kelsey, you bought a dress. You like it? That's good. You could show a little enthusiasm. I'm making dinner. I'm tired. I don't have enthusiasm to spare for a dress. Her expression hardened. She crumpled the dress back into the bag. You know what? Forget it. I don't know why I even bother. She grabbed the bags and walked out of the kitchen. Her footsteps pounded up the stairs. A door slammed. Nolan stirred the pasta, watching steam rise from the pot. This was their life now. Everything he did was wrong. Everything she did was beyond question. The distance between them had become a chasm that no amount of small talk or forced civility could bridge. He didn't go upstairs to apologize. Didn't try to smooth it over. He just finished making dinner, ate alone at the counter, and washed his dishes in silence. Later that week, he overheard another phone call. This time he didn't catch it by accident. He'd been putting away laundry when he heard Kelsey's voice drift from the bedroom. I'm telling you, the timing's perfect, she was saying. I've got the conference next month. I'll have some distance, and I can figure everything out from there. Nolan stood in the hallway, holding a stack of folded towels. He's not going to make it difficult, she continued. That's not who he is. He'll probably just want it done quickly and quietly, which is fine by me. The other person said something. The house. Kelsey laughed. Yeah, I'm keeping the house. I've lived here for 5 years. That counts for something legally. Plus, he travels for work sometimes. I'm the one who's actually made a home. Nolan set the towels down on the hallway table and walked back downstairs. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. He sat at his desk, opened his computer, and pulled up the documents Tom had sent him that afternoon. Then he started organizing them into a folder. Clear labels. Clean copies. Everything in order. If she wanted a war, she wouldn't get one. She'd get something much worse. An organized, methodical dismantling of every assumption she'd made about how this would go. The conference in Chicago came and went. Kelsey returned energized, talking about connections she'd made, opportunities on the horizon, ways she could advance her career. She seemed lighter, happier than she'd been in months. Nolan listened without comment, made appropriate sounds of interest, asked basic questions that kept her talking. He was buying time, getting his affairs in order, making sure every detail was locked down. Tom had advised him not to file first. Let her do it, Tom had said. Let her show her hand. Then we respond with facts she can't argue with. So Nolan waited. He went to work, came home, made dinner, watched TV, maintained the appearance of normalcy while internally preparing for the inevitable. Kelsey started staying late at the office more often, started taking phone calls in other rooms, started being vague about her plans. The signs were all there, but Nolan didn't confront her, didn't ask questions, didn't give her any reason to think he suspected what was coming. He just documented, quietly, carefully, screenshots of credit card statements showing her spending, records of bank transfers, emails where she made unilateral decisions about household expenses without consulting him. Not to use against her vindicatively, just to have, just to show the pattern if it became necessary. By February, the pretense of their marriage had become transparent even to them. They barely spoke beyond logistics. Who was picking up groceries? Whether they needed to schedule maintenance on her car. Surface-level exchanges that required no real engagement. One Saturday morning, Kelsey came downstairs dressed for running. "I'm meeting Julie for coffee after," she said, not quite looking at him. "Okay, I might be gone most of the day. That's fine." She hesitated in the doorway, like she was waiting for him to ask her to stay, or to ask where she was really going, or to say something, anything, that would give her an excuse to start a fight. But he didn't. So she left. Nolan sat in the quiet house, drinking coffee, looking out the window at the lake in the distance. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "You coming down for your birthday next month?" He'd forgotten his birthday was coming up. 35. Halfway through his 30s. Married to someone who'd stopped pretending to care about him. "Maybe. I'll let you know. You don't sound excited about it. Just another day." Birthdays are important, Nolan. Even if you don't think so. He smiled. Even over text, she was still being a mom. "I know. I'll try to make it down." "Good. I miss you." "Miss you too." He set the phone down and stared at it for a long moment. When this was over, when the divorce finally happened and the dust settled, he'd drive down to Plainview, sit in his mom's kitchen, let her make him chili, let her ask questions he didn't want to answer, and offer advice he probably needed. But first, he had to get through whatever was coming next. And based on the way Kelsey had been acting, it was coming soon. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Nolan was in his office when he heard the mail truck pull up outside. 5 minutes later, he walked out to check the mailbox, bills, junk mail, and a large manila envelope with a return address from a law firm in Springfield. Not Tom's firm. He brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and looked at it for a moment before opening it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words were typed in bold at the top of the first page. He read through the document methodically. Kelsey was filing on grounds of irreconcilable differences. She was requesting the house, joint custody of assets, and ongoing support to maintain the lifestyle she'd become accustomed to during the marriage. Lifestyle she'd become accustomed to. That phrase jumped out at him, as if she'd built that lifestyle herself. As if his work, his planning, his money hadn't been the foundation of everything she now claimed to deserve. Nolan took a photo of every page with his phone, then forwarded them to Tom with a simple message. "It's here." Tom called within 10 minutes. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah. Have you talked to her?" "She's at work." "Good. Don't talk to her until we've had a chance to go through this properly. I need you to come in tomorrow. Can you do 9 in the morning?" "I'll be there." "Nolan, this is going to get ugly. She's asking for things she has no legal right to. When she realizes that, she's not going to take it well." "I know. Just prepare yourself." "I am prepared." Tom was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I think you are. That night, Kelsey came home late. Almost 9 o'clock. She walked in with her coat still on, her purse slung over her shoulder, and stopped when she saw Nolan sitting at the kitchen table. You got it, she said. Not a question. Yeah, I was going to tell you. When? I don't know. Soon. She set her purse down, didn't take off her coat. I think we both know this isn't working. You could have talked to me before filing. Would it have changed anything? I don't know. You didn't give me the chance to find out. She exhaled, a long breath that sounded like relief. I'm not trying to be cruel, Nolan. I can't do this anymore. We make each other miserable. I don't make you miserable. You make yourself miserable and blame me for it. Her jaw tightened. See? That right there. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You never take responsibility for anything. I take responsibility for what's mine, but I'm not responsible for your feelings about my actions. God, you're so cold. She shook her head. I don't even know why I'm surprised. This is who you've always been. What do you want from me, Kelsey? You filed for divorce. What reaction were you expecting? I don't know. Maybe a little emotion? Maybe some acknowledgement that this matters. It matters. But crying about it won't change anything. No, but it might make you seem human. She turned to leave, then stopped. I'm staying with Julie for a while. I'll come get my things this weekend. Fine. And Nolan? My lawyer's going to fight for what I'm entitled to. Just so you know, I'm sure they will. Something in his tone made her pause. She looked at him more carefully, like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. You're not even worried? Are you? She said slowly. Should I be? I'm asking for half of everything. The house. Support. All of it. You can ask for whatever you want. You think I won't get it? I think you'll get exactly what you're legally entitled to. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means you should probably read the documents you signed more carefully. Her face went pale, then red. What did you do? I didn't do anything. You just never bothered to understand what you were signing. You tricked me. No, I protected myself. There's a difference. Kelsey grabbed her purse off the counter. Her hands were shaking. You're going to regret this. Maybe, but probably not. She slammed the door on her way out. Nolan sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the wall. He felt nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, just a strange, hollow sense of inevitability. This was always how it was going to end. The mediation took place in a conference room at the courthouse in Springfield. Kelsey arrived with her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Shaw who looked like she charged $400 an hour and enjoyed making men squirm. She wore a sharp suit, carried an expensive briefcase, and had the kind of confident smile that said she'd won cases just like this 100 times before. Nolan arrived with Tom, who wore the same rumpled suit he always wore and carried his documents in a battered accordion folder. They didn't look like a fair fight, but appearances were misleading. The mediator was a middle-aged man named Griffith who seemed tired of divorce cases, but professional enough to hide it. He laid out the ground rules, explained the process, and asked if anyone had questions. Patricia Shaw spoke first. My client is seeking an equitable division of marital assets. She began, her voice smooth and practiced, including the marital home, which has significant value, and ongoing support to maintain her standard of living. Griffith looked at Tom. Response. Tom opened his folder with exaggerated slowness, pulling out papers one at a time. The house in question, he said, his gravelly voice filling the room, is not a marital asset. It's owned by Mr. Price's business entity, established before the marriage. Mrs. Price signed documents acknowledging this at the time of purchase. He slid copies across the table. Patricia picked them up, skimmed them, and her confident expression faltered just slightly. These documents are legally binding, Tom interrupted. Witnessed, notarized, signed by your client with full opportunity to seek independent legal counsel, which she declined. Patricia looked at Kelsey, who was staring at the papers like she'd never seen them before. I don't remember signing this, Kelsey said. Your signature's right there, Tom said, pointing. And there. And there. Patricia recovered quickly. Even so, my client has lived in that home for 5 years. She's contributed to its upkeep, its maintenance. There's an argument for interest based on time and contribution. Missouri law doesn't support that argument when the property is held by a business entity, Tom said calmly. And Mrs. Price's contributions to upkeep are hard to quantify given that Mr. Price paid all mortgage payments, all utility bills, all maintenance costs. If anything, she's been living rent-free for 5 years. That's not, Kelsey started, but Patricia put a hand on her arm. Let me handle this, Patricia said quietly. She turned back to the mediator. What about spousal support? My client has become accustomed to a certain standard of living during this marriage. Mr. Price has the means to maintain that standard. Tom pulled out another document. Prenuptial agreement. Section 4, paragraph 2. Both parties expressly waived any claim to spousal support in the event of divorce. He handed it to Griffith, who read it over his reading glasses. Is this your signature, Mrs. Price? Griffith asked. Kelsey leaned over to look. Her voice came out small. Yes. Did you read this document before signing? Yes. I looked at it. Did you have legal representation when you signed? No. But Nolan said. What Mr. Price said isn't relevant, Patricia interjected. What matters is what's in writing. Exactly, Tom agreed cheerfully. The mediation lasted 3 hours. Every argument Patricia made, Tom countered with documentation. Every claim Kelsey tried to assert, Tom dismantled with facts. The joint bank account only had $8,000 in it. Everything else was separate. The furniture? Purchased by Nolan before the marriage. Receipts available. The cars? Titled separately. Hers in her name, is in his. Kelsey's retirement account? Untouched. All hers. By the end, Patricia Shaw looked like someone who'd walked into court expecting an easy win and discovered she was defending a case with no legs to stand on. So what does my client get? She finally asked, her professional demeanor cracking just enough to show frustration. What's in the joint account? Tom said. Her personal belongings. Her car. Her retirement savings, which are substantial. And the knowledge that she signed a fair prenup that she chose not to read. Kelsey's voice rose. That's not fair. Griffith looked at her with something like sympathy. Mrs. Price, fair is what's legal. And legally, Mr. Price is correct. You waived your claims to his assets. You signed documents acknowledging the ownership structure of the house. Nothing in this situation appears to be fraudulent or coerced. But, I'm sorry, but that's what the documents show. Patricia Shaw closed her briefcase with a sharp click. We'll need time to review our options. Take all the time you need, Tom said. But the documents won't change. Outside the courthouse, Nolan stood on the steps while Tom lit a cigarette he'd been dying to smoke for 3 hours. That went about as well as it could have, Tom said, exhaling smoke into the cold air. Yeah, she's going to be angry. She's already angry. Really angry. When people realize they've been outmaneuvered, they don't handle it well. Nolan nodded. I'll be ready. Tom studied him. You did this right, Nolan. You protected yourself without being malicious. Everything you did was legal, smart, and fair. Doesn't feel fair to her. That's because she expected you to roll over. When you didn't, it became unfair in her mind. Tom flicked ash off his cigarette. But you know what? That's her problem, not yours. They stood in silence for a moment. Go home, Tom said finally. Get some rest. This isn't over yet, but the hard part's done. Nolan drove home through downtown Springfield, past the courthouse, past the coffee shops and boutiques Kelsey used to drag him to on weekends. The town looked the same as always, but something felt different. Like he'd crossed a threshold he couldn't uncross. When he got to the house, her car was in the driveway. He parked, steeled himself, and went inside. Kelsey was in the living room, surrounded by boxes. She was throwing things into them, photo frames, books, decorative pillows, with angry, jerky movements. You lied to me, she said the moment he walked in. No, I didn't. You said the house was ours. I said we bought a house together, which we did. I paid for it. You live in it. You deliberately tricked me into signing papers that screwed me over. Kelsey, Nolan set his keys down on the counter. I gave you every opportunity to read what you were signing. You chose not to. That's not my fault. She threw a picture frame into a box. You know what? Fine. Take your precious house. I don't want it anyway. Okay. I'll be out by this weekend. And then you can live here alone with your perfect little life and your perfect little plans. If that's what you want. She spun to face him. Do you even care? At all? About any of this? I care that you filed for divorce and try to take things that weren't yours. I live here. I've been your wife for 5 years. That should count for something. It does count. It counted when I paid the mortgage every month, when I covered the bills, when I supported your career and your trips and your spending. You're such a martyr. I'm not a martyr. I'm just done pretending this marriage was something it wasn't. Kelsey's eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears. You're going to regret this, Nolan. When you're alone in this house with no one who loves you, you're going to realize what you threw away. I didn't throw anything away. You did. She grabbed another box, nearly dropped it, then stormed toward the stairs. I'm getting the rest of my things. Don't talk to me. I wasn't planning to. She went upstairs. Doors slammed. Drawers banged open and closed. Nolan sat down on the couch, surrounded by the chaos of her packing, and realized he felt lighter than he had in months. It was almost over. Kelsey's family found out within days. Raymond called first. I heard, he said without preamble, about the divorce. Yeah. Kelsey says you trapped her, tricked her into signing away her rights. I didn't trap her. She signed documents without reading them. That's not the same thing. She's my daughter, Nolan. I'm going to believe her version. That's your choice. You always were slippery. Quiet guys usually are. Nolan should have been angry. Instead, he just felt tired. Is there something you need, Raymond? Or did you call just to insult me? I called to tell you that you're making a mistake. Kelsey's a good woman. You're throwing away a good marriage because you're too stubborn to compromise. I compromised for 5 years. Kelsey never did. That's not how she tells it. I'm sure it's not. Raymond was silent for a moment. You're really not going to fight for this. There's nothing to fight for. She filed. I'm letting her go. You'll regret it. Maybe. Raymond hung up without saying goodbye. Patricia called later that week. I just want you to know, she said, her voice stiff, that Kelsey is devastated. Okay. She thought you loved her. I did. She just made it impossible to keep loving her. That's a cruel thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. Patricia sighed. I don't know what happened between you two, but she's my daughter, and I'm going to support her. I understand. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you've destroyed her life. No, Patricia. I protected mine. There's a difference. She hung up too. Lance sent a text. You're an asshole. Nolan didn't respond. But then something shifted. 2 weeks after the mediation, Raymond called again. This time, his voice was different. Quieter. Less certain. I need to talk to you, he said. About what? Can we meet? Just you and me. They met at a diner halfway between Cedar Hollow and Raymond's place. It was mid-afternoon, the place nearly empty except for a couple of truckers at the counter. Raymond looked older than Nolan remembered. Grayer. More tired. I owe you an apology, Raymond said after they had ordered coffee. Nolan waited. I talked to Tom Brennan, Raymond continued. He's a friend of mine. I called him to ask what really happened. He told me. Told you what? That you didn't trick Kelsey. That she signed everything with full disclosure. That you actually protected her interests in the prenup more than you protected your own. Raymond wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. I thought you were the bad guy here, Nolan. I was wrong. Okay. I also talked to Patricia. Really talked to her. About the things Kelsey's been saying. The way she talks about you. He looked up. I've been making excuses for my daughter for a long time. We both have. But we're starting to see. She's not the victim she says she is. Nolan didn't know what to say to that. She's been taking money from our account, Raymond said quietly. Patricia just found out. Kelsey said it was an emergency, that she needed it for rent. But she doesn't have rent. She's staying with friends. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I don't know. Be glad you got out before it got worse. Raymond shook his head. I raised her to be independent. Strong. But somewhere along the way, that turned into entitled. They sat in silence for a while. I don't expect forgiveness, Raymond finally said, for the things I said, the way I treated you. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. What you were dealing with. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, you were a good husband. Better than she deserved. Raymond left cash on the table for his coffee and walked out. Nolan sat alone, staring at the black coffee he hadn't touched. It was a strange kind of indication. He hadn't needed Raymond's approval or apology, but having someone from Kelsey's own family acknowledge the truth, felt like the final piece clicking into place. Kelsey moved out in April. She took her clothes, her personal items, and furniture that Nolan told her she could have even though he'd technically paid for it. He didn't fight her on it, didn't make it harder than it needed to be. She rented an apartment across town, 1 bedroom, smaller than she was used to, but nice enough. The lifestyle she demanded didn't follow her there. Bills started piling up. The credit card debt she'd accumulated, thinking it would be absorbed into the divorce settlement, became her responsibility alone. The trips she'd planned, the purchases she'd made, the life she'd been living, all of it came due. She called mutual friends, explaining her side. Some believed her. Most didn't. The ones who knew both of them had seen the pattern. They'd watch Kelsey put Nolan down, spend his money, and dismiss his work. When the divorce happened, they weren't surprised. Slowly, the friend group fractured. People chose sides. And more often than not, they chose distance from the drama. Kelsey's job became harder. Without the cushion of Nolan's income, every expense mattered. She started declining happy hours, skipping conferences that weren't essential, driving her 10-year-old car with 150,000 miles on it instead of upgrading like she'd planned. The charm that had always worked for her, the ability to smile and deflect and make people forget she'd just insulted them, stopped being effective when there was nothing to gain from her. People saw through it. Finally, Nolan sold the house in Cedar Hollow in June. It wasn't about spite or running away. It was about closure. The place was beautiful, but it was tied to a chapter of his life he needed to end completely. He listed it, got an offer within 2 weeks from a family with 3 kids who loved the lake view, and closed 30 days later. He made a profit, a significant one, enough to buy something smaller, quieter, further from town. He found a cabin 20 miles north, tucked back in the woods on 40 acres. No neighbors, no lake view, just trees, silence, and space. The cabin needed work. New roof, updated wiring, fresh paint. But it was solid. Good bones. The kind of place his mother would approve of. He spent the summer fixing it up, working with his hands, sleeping better than he had in years. His business continued. Clients kept calling. Work kept coming in. The divorce hadn't touched his professional reputation because he'd never let his personal life interfere with his work. By August, the cabin felt like home. One evening, his mother drove up to visit. She walked through the place, inspecting everything with a critical eye, then nodded. "This suits you," she said. Yeah, it's honest. No pretense." She looked at him. "You look better. Healthier. I feel better." "Good." She hugged him. "I'm proud of you, you know, for getting out when you needed to. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, but you did it when you were ready. That's what matters." They sat on the porch that night, drinking beer, watching fireflies blink in the dark. "Have you heard from her?" his mother asked. "No." "Do you want to?" "Not really." "Good. That woman didn't deserve you." Nolan smiled. "You're biased. I'm a mother. It's my job." She took a sip of beer. "But I'm also right." Kelsey sent an email in September. The subject line was empty. The message was short. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I handled things badly. I said things I shouldn't have. And I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to take me back or even to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I didn't see then. You were always good to me, and I took that for granted. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're happy. K." Nolan read it 3 times. Then he closed his laptop without responding. Not out of cruelty, not to punish her, but because responding would reopen a door that needed to stay closed. Kelsey didn't need his forgiveness to move forward, and he didn't need her apology to find peace. They both made choices. Those choices had consequences, and now they were living with them. That was enough. October brought cooler weather. The trees around the cabin turned gold and red. The mornings were cold enough that Nolan started lighting fires in the wood stove before his coffee. He took long walks through the woods, worked on client projects, read books he'd been meaning to get to for years, cooked meals that were just for him. No one to accommodate, no one to please. The quiet was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. One afternoon, Tom called. "Just checking in," he said. making sure you're doing all right. I'm good. You sound good. Relaxed. I am relaxed. Good. That's what I like to hear. Tom paused. You know, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've handled a lot of divorces. And I gotta tell you, most people don't come out the other side as intact as you have. I had good representation. You also had your shit together. That's rare. They talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. Nolan stood on his porch, looking out at the woods. Autumn light filtered through the branches, casting everything in shades of amber. He'd lost a marriage, but he'd gained something more valuable. Clarity about who he was, what he needed, what he wouldn't compromise on. Peace that couldn't be manipulated or taken away or bargained with. The kind of peace that came from knowing he'd been fair, even when fairness hadn't been extended to him. From knowing he'd protected himself without being cruel. From knowing he'd walked away with his integrity intact. Kelsey had lost what she thought she owned because she'd never valued who built it. She'd seen Nolan's quiet strength as weakness, his careful planning as lack of ambition, his unwillingness to engage in her games as an invitation to take advantage. She'd been wrong on all counts, and by the time she realized it, it was too late. Winter came. Snow fell quietly on the cabin, muffling sound, blanketing the woods in white. Nolan worked, walked, read, existed without drama or chaos or people who demanded more than he had to give. He didn't date, didn't look for companionship, didn't need it. Maybe someday he would. Maybe someday he'd meet someone who valued what he offered instead of resenting what he didn't. But for now, being alone was exactly right. His phone buzzed one December morning. A text from Raymond. Kelsey moved back to Kansas City. Thought you'd want to know. Nolan stared at the message for a moment, then set his phone down. Kansas City, 6 hours away. Far enough that their paths wouldn't cross by accident. Good. He hoped she found what she was looking for there. Hoped she learned something from what had happened between them. Hoped she'd treat the next person better. But he didn't hope hard enough to reach out and find out. That chapter was over. He made coffee. Watched the sun rise through the trees. Let the day begin the way all his days began now. Quietly, without obligation, without performance. Nolan Price had been called a lot of things during his marriage. Unambitious, passive, boring, small, but he'd never been weak. And in the end, that made all the difference. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He wasn't vindictive. There was no point. He was just finished. And sometimes being finished cleanly, completely, with your dignity intact, was the real victory. Kelsey had learned that lesson too late. Nolan had known all along.